Hello and welcome everyone. I am so excited to chat with you all about something that I just kept seeing come up over and over again when I kept working with my clients, this connection. I mean, everything in our bodies are connected, but specifically the foot and the pelvic floor and what's going on in one area could be going on in the other area. So I just want you to, before we get rolling with everything, just stop and think, what's something that brought you here? Why are you curious about this? What's something you might be struggling with or you want to work on or learn about? And maybe it's things that you've heard that I hear over and over again from my clients. Well, I've had plantar fasciitis for years. I've been to the podiatrist. I've got the orthotics. I've done the rolling. That's not seeming to help. Or I've went to see my OBGYN and they just said, just go do some Kegels. Don't worry about it. You can jump on that trampoline, no problem. Just do those Kegels. Or I've been having back pain or hip pain for years and I do all of the stretches and everything and seeing all of these people and nothing seems to be making a difference. And when we tap into a lot of stuff we're going to talk about today, specifically the core and how that core system works, and then the relation to how the whole lower body moves, it's that missing link that I see with so many people. And I just wanted to give you an example before we get started to kind of see where we're going today. And I was working with this woman and she had had foot pain on and off for years, had been to a number of different doctors, had lots of different injections and was trying one more time and somehow our paths crossed and I talked to her about what had worked and what hadn't worked and some of the exercises and everything was just concentrated on her foot. And sometimes it did give her a little bit of relief, but it would always come back. So then I dove a little deeper and was asking her more questions about her pelvic health. Do you have any incontinence or leaking? And yes, and nobody had come across that or asked her that. And we started working further up the chain with some of the things that I'm going to show you today, in addition to working on some things with her hip, and her foot pain got better and the leaking and incontinence went away. And she thought she was going to have to just deal with that because she was getting older, told by all of her friends like, oh, this is just something that happens. But in working on her foot, we were able to help issues she had going on further up the chain. So the biggest thing I want to have you guys get out of today is just keep thinking big picture. Our bodies are these amazing resilient systems, and it's getting them to work together as a system versus just working on things in isolation. So we're going to do a little bit brief, I promise. I'm such a nerd anatomy, but just a little bit on anatomy because I think it's really important that you can see what those structures are that we're going to be targeting today. We're going to talk about what our core is, how it works, and then the fun stuff we'll jump into some exercises and things that you can take away to start implementing in your daily routines today. Oh, when you hear the word core, what's something that pops into your head? Like, what's the first thing you think of? And I know for me, years ago, I used to be like, oh, I got to work my abs. I've got to have really strong core and do crunches all of the times and working on your Kegels. And now I have such a different perspective and take on what this core system is. Your core is made up of your pelvic floor muscles, your abdominal muscles, and all of the abdominals, not just that deep transverse abdominis, your deep back stabilizers, and the most important one, our diaphragm, which is our breathing muscle from right here. And all of those need to be working together in a system, not just doing Kegels or just doing crunches. And when everything is working in unison, everything's great. But what happens when something's not working as efficiently as it could, we create too much pressure in our abdomen in this system. And that's when we start to see different things moving and loading a little differently. So that's what our core is. We're going to talk about how it works in a minute. And then we're going to talk about the connection between our feet and our pelvic floor now. So there's several different ways there's this connection that's going on. And the first one is our nerves. So the nerves show you on the spine here. So we've got nerves that come out of the spine at different levels coming out through here. And then they travel down your leg and they branch out to all the different muscles, telling them how and what they should be doing. So the nerves that work, the deep muscles in the bottom of your feet, not these like grippy toes, but the deep bottles on the foot, are the same nerve that works your pelvic floor muscles. So what's going on in the pelvic floor and the bladder, controlled by these same nerve roots. So that's your S2 and S3 nerve roots for that. Okay, anatomy is really cool, but what does that mean for you guys? There's certain things you can do to affect these nerves that will help both the bottom of your foot and the pelvic floor. The other way that they're connected is through neuroscience. So whether that it's called your homunculus, and your homunculus is a part of your brain that's receiving sensory information coming in. And the gist of it, so I'll kind of break it down, is that you've got your different body parts on this part of your brain, your homunculus, and like our feet are enormous on this and our hands are really big on this. And that's because those are the two most sensitive parts of our body. But the foot on your homunculus, where it's located, is really close to your genitals. So that connection between pelvic floor and your feet from the brain connection. And then we have the musculoskeletal connection. So what's happening at your foot? So what's going on with the movement of your foot? So you might have heard the term like you have flat feet. When your foot comes down closer to the ground when we're walking, this whole chain, your whole leg has to rotate inward. And then when we're coming up, so maybe that like higher arch or our foot lifts up, the leg has to do the same thing as well. And that travels up into our hip and up into our pelvis. So the long of that is just everything's connected. And if we're rigid or stiff in one part, that's going to affect what's going on our foot, how we're loading our foot. If you've got heel pain in a certain area, or if you've got pain underneath your toes in a different area, it could be something that's coming up higher. So one last little bit with anatomy, and then we'll get into some of the fun stuff, just so you can see pelvic floor muscles and how everything is connected. So these are your deep pelvic floor muscles, and you see the tailbone coming along in there. A lot of people with pelvic floor issues, especially tight pelvic floors, have tailbone pain. That's your connection there. The hip, so here's your hip socket. One of your deep rotator hip muscles here attaches onto the bottom part of your pelvic floor muscles. So if the rotators are tight, it's going to pull on those pelvic floor muscles. So that's just kind of give you a little bit of anatomy. So some of the things that we're working on today. And then now here's where we get into what we're going to work on. So before I explain what's going on, I want everyone to just take a breath in. It doesn't matter what position you're in, just take a breath and observe. What are you noticing? Because listening to our bodies is key. What did you feel as you took that breath in? Did certain things move? Were you aware of different parts of your body? So going back to our core system. So we've got the deep lower ab muscles and our upper abs. We've got the pelvic floor, the bottom part, our deep back stabilizers, and then this breathing muscle, our diaphragm. Now, how our core likes to work is when we take a breath in, our diaphragm goes down. The diaphragm descends and it pushes on these pelvic floor muscles. And then when we exhale, it comes back up. Now, we've got fascia. It's connective tissue all throughout our body. If you kind of imagine putting on this like bodysuit, it's connected with everything. So as our diaphragm comes up, it's attached, that fascia is connected to the pelvic floor muscles and our lower abs. So just by breathing efficiently, you can fire up those muscles. And a lot of time what happens is, again, it's a minute, but a lot of times we're not breathing properly, so we can't feel the lengthening of those pelvic floor muscles, and then we can't feel the activation of them, because this, like I mentioned, is a pressure system. So when we breathe, The diaphragm goes down, the pelvic floor muscles go down. When we exhale, they all come up. So it's this relationship going back and forth. What happens? Maybe you're stressed. I mean, who hasn't been stressed these days? If you're in pain, something hurts, maybe we just breathe into our chest. What that does is you're not able to send your diaphragm, that breathing muscle, all the way down. So you're going to create too much pressure. You're not able to manage the pressure in this system. So because our diaphragm isn't able to go all the way down, we're going to see all that pressure, and you can imagine the pelvic floor I just showed you. So that's pushing on those pelvic floor muscles. When we have too much pressure building up in this system, our bodies go into this gripping mode. So maybe you're gripping and holding tight with the pelvic floor. Maybe you're gripping and squeezing with those glutes, gripping with those upper abs. And all of that plays into how you're able to use this core system. And the other thing with our diaphragm that's really important with breathing is if you've had back pain, people tell you to breathe for the back pain. Your diaphragm's up in the ribs, but then the lower parts attaches onto the front part of your spine. So just by doing the breathing, you're able to take a little bit of stress off your spine. So a little added anatomy in there. So with our breathing now, let's try that a little differently. So you're going to, if you imagined, I hear a lot of people say, oh, Melissa, well, I practice my belly breathing. I'm in my yoga class and I do lots of belly breathing. Is belly breathing bad? No. But what belly breathing can do is create too much pressure down here. What we want to be able to do is breathe out to the sides of our rib cage in the back. And we'll practice that a little bit, but you can start now and just see if it feels a little different than when I had you do the breath the first time. So if you take those hands, place your hands down at the bottom of your rib cage, and then take a gentle breath in, sending your breath out to the sides of the rib cage. And then exhale, let it go. And see where the breath goes there. Now, this is the most important part of everything. I wish we had longer today because it just takes a long time to get these down, but you're going to have some tools to practice this. But it's that breathing out into the sides of your rib cage. You feel the diaphragm go down. You'll feel a little bit of pressure on those pelvic floor muscles. And then that exhale, it comes back up. And a lot of people, Melissa, you're nuts. I cannot feel this. So we'll practice that laying down in a little bit. But it's this idea of we've got to manage the pressure in our abdominal area, because when we have too much pressure, it pushes on the pelvic floor. We could get hip, back, foot pain. So breathing is key to set off this core system versus a lot of times what I'll hear is people well, I have to have a really strong core, so I have to do tons of Kegels. Well, if it's already too tight and you've got too much pressure and you're just squeezing and squeezing and squeezing and doing Kegels, it's going to offset this pressure system. So it goes back to everything has to work together. Alrighty, so now some of the fun stuff anatomy done. If you want to, you can feel free to join in. I'm going to have you stand up, or if you are sitting down, you can do the same thing sitting down. And I want you to take a look down at your feet. Just kind of notice your feet. What are you seeing? Are they kind of squished together? Are they spread apart? Does one foot look similar to the other foot? And then I want you to take your feet and spread those toes out. See if you can spread your toes. Maybe they move a lot. Maybe they don't move. Promise you, the more you practice this, they will definitely be moving more for you. And then kind of relate that. Do you have something going on one side? And can you move them more on one side versus the other side? Now, let's stop with the spreading the toes. And now you're going to take just your big toe and you're going to lift just the big toe up. The four toes stay down. Now, do the four toes, do they curl and grab, or can you just gently lift the big toe up? Do you notice if you roll to the outside of your foot? Okay, now we're going to put the big toe down and then lift the four toes up. And what happens? Are they moving? Are they not moving? Do they move a little bit? Do you feel like the shins and your quads are like, oh, I'm working so hard to help out? And then lower them back down. And body positioning, I don't have enough time to get into all that, but body positioning definitely plays into this as well. So when you're standing, where's the weight in your feet? Is it more in your heels? Is it more in the front? Are you kind of rounded forward a little bit? What are some things you're noticing? Because in order to get this pressure system working, we need it stacked on top of each other. So a posture like this doesn't work. Posture with those hips back, same thing. When we get our rib cage stacked over our pelvis, it lets the diaphragm go more. So I want you to see, just play around a little bit and see if you can change your position and then try to spread those toes out again and see. Does that change anything? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So being able to spread your toes is an exercise I give all of my patients, whether we're working on the foot or we're working on the pelvic floor, because of that nerve connection I told you. And a lot of times we're jamming our foot into shoes and like squishing our toes, and you can't properly activate the muscles in the bottom of the foot. So by starting to spread your toes, you're going to help build up that deep intrinsic foot strength versus putting yourself in orthotics or super supportive shoes. Work those muscles in the bottom of your feet to make a big difference. Okay, so then let's do one other thing. We're gonna fold forward. Bear with me, I'll explain why in a minute. So just fold forward, let your head get nice and heavy. And then I want you to check in. Is it pulling in the hamstrings? Is it pulling in your low back? What do you notice in the feet or the backs of your calves? And then slowly come all the way back up. Now, if you've got the golf ball or a tennis ball, we're going to start on our right foot and we're going to be rolling with a purpose. So we're going to start with the ball just at the bottom of your right heel. So the toes are going to stay down on the ground and the heel will be up, and you'll just very gently roll back and forth along the bottom of that plantar fascia. Now, if you don't have a ball, you can use your hands to do this as well. So if you just take your hands, I probably should not be sitting on that block. All right, so if you take your hands along the bottom and just gently do little swipes with your fingers across the bottom, but see what happens with your toes, whether you're using your hands or you're using the ball. Are they curling? Are they gripping? Can you soften those toes a little bit? So just gently going back and forth. So with this technique, 30 to 60 seconds is all you need. This is a myofascial release technique, because when we I'm going to get in there and break up all the scar tissue, you're not breaking up the scar tissue. You're hydrating your tissues so that the fascia can glide back and forth. Now we mentioned fascias like this, bodysuits everywhere. So the fascia on the bottom of our feet goes up to our calves, the back of our thighs, and everything is connected. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to take the ball, or you're going to take your fingers and kind of roll from the mound of your big toe down to your heel. Mound of your big toe down to your heel. And we'll do a couple swipes down through each. Now you might find some lovely speed bumps along the way. And if you do, you can kind of hold and stay there. This is not a balancing, so you can definitely hold on to something if you need. Ooh. And then we're going to slowly start to work our way down the outside of our foot. Ooh. I'm always surprised how tender the outside of my foot is. Okay, and the same thing, see if you can just keep those toes nice and soft. So if you didn't have the ball, you can use those fingers to get right in between each of the toes, because our toes tend to be pretty stiff and the foot doesn't want to move a whole lot. Okay, now you can come back to that position that we just did the first time and try to see what feels like on the left side versus the right side. Is there more awareness? Do you notice anything further up the chain? What are you feeling? And then let's head over to the other side. So we'll start at the base of the heel, and we're just going to rock back and forth over those areas. And how does one side feel compared to the other side? Checking, seeing what's going on there. Same thing, 30, 60 seconds is plenty. And if you find one of those spots, you can always just kind of hold it there. And then we'll start to roll. So we'll roll from the big toe down to the heel. Ooh, I'm looking for those lovely, lovely little speed bumps. So for plantar fasciitis, here's another little anatomy. Typical trigger points can be this inside muscle along the inside of your foot. Your abductor hallucis runs along this inside arch. So there's usually some pretty good trigger points in there. And then also the inside part of your calf can be some lovely little spots. Let's start to work our way towards the outside of the foot. And the other thing with foot pain, what's the mobility like in our foot? Can we move our big toes forward and backwards, or move the toes forward and backward? Are the toes curling? Those are all indications of we're overusing certain muscles and certain muscles aren't firing up. Okay, so now we're gonna come back, both feet back, down on the ground. And then you're gonna try to spread your toes again. Did it change? Did it make it a little easier? Maybe, maybe not, and that's okay. But you're just pulling in all this information from your body and how things are changing. Now, what I want you to do next, we did the fold forward. I want you to go forward again and see what's changed. Maybe again, nothing. This one always works with me. I can always go that a little bit further because of that fascial connection. We loosened it up on the bottom of our feet. So maybe you don't feel as much pulling in your calf or your hamstrings. If you've ever been one of those people, or you know someone that's like, oh, I stretch my hamstrings all the time, but they seem so tight. It could be your nervous system and that fascia connection line. So this is a great way to kind of sneak into that. All right, let's come on. Oh, we'll do standing now next. So squatting. A lot of people will say it hurts my foot or hurts my knees. I want you to observe, pull in information when we're doing this. So just take your squat how you know. It doesn't have to be, it can be like a little one, or you don't even have to squat at all. But if you just send those hips back, what do you notice? Where's the weight in your feet? How's the breathing? What are you feeling? You'll hear a lot of times people will be like, oh, I can't let my knees go over my toes. You can let those knees go as far over. That's totally fine to have happen. So we'll squat down, come back up. What happens with the feet? Do they curl? Do they grip? When those toes are gripping, it's our body's sign of saying we're looking for stability somewhere, or we're looking for more mobility, a little bit more movement. Which in my case, my ankles are so tight. Sometimes that'll happen. So come back up, and we're gonna try the breathing that we did. We're gonna breathe out to the sides of our rib cage. And I want you to think, whenever we're doing anything standing, we're gonna anchor through the mound of your big toe here. So if you tend to roll to the outside of your foot or the inside of your foot, we want mound of big toe, outside of your foot, and your heel. And we're going to inhale, because we're working on managing that pressure. We're going to inhale when we go down and send your hips back and let those knees go forward. Inhale, come down, knees go forward. Exhale, breathe out through your mouth, come back up. Inhale, go down, send those hips way back. What's going on at the toes? Can you soften them? Do they come? Let those knees come forward. Exhale, come back up. Now, another thing you could do is if you had a block or something, you put it in between your knees. You're like, no, I'm just not feeling the connection with my lower abs or my pelvic floor. When we go down, you're going to inhale. Don't worry about the block or the pillow, wherever you got there. Inhale, go down. And then on your exhale, squeeze in, come up. And you want to be very careful that we don't thrust and send the hips way forward, but we're just pushing, come up. And you might feel with squeezing the block, you get a little more initiation of the glutes. Maybe that pelvic floor is working. Maybe those toes aren't gripping quite as much. So we'll inhale, go down. Send the hips back. Those knees can come forward. That's absolutely okay. And then exhale, squeeze that block, come back up. Now, if we wanted to add in a little bit more foot component and work on the strength in our feet, you can inhale, send that breath go down, hips go back, exhale, push, come up, and then maybe you lift up the heels, come up onto those toes. Now, when you're coming up onto your toes, what happens at the feet? Do the feet want to roll to the outside, or can you keep the weight pretty even over those toes? And then lower the heels, sink back down. Exhale, press, come back up. So this is just a fun one to play around with, noticing that connection. This is a little bit more advanced of an exercise. So we're gonna go over what you can get down first to come up to this. But since we were standing, I wanted to show you that connection. And as you keep practicing your breath and the connection with your pelvic floor, you may notice, oh, I feel the muscles on the bottom of my feet working more. I'm not gripping my toes quite as much. So let's head all the way down. And here's where if you have a pillow or something, keep that nearby. So it's all about managing the pressure in our abdominal area. So just start to notice first, laying down and come to your breath. What do you notice with that breath? What's moving? What's not moving? And the other thing with the breathing that we've been working on, we're behind our devices, our computers all the time. This rib cage area gets really stiff, so it can make the breathing piece a little bit more difficult. So I want you to see, where does that breath go? Does it stay in your chest? Does it go to your belly? Can you expand your ribs out to the side to take that breath in? This is the most important part of getting the core to go. So as you breathe in, the diaphragm goes down. You think of those pelvic floor muscles, just a gentle pressure on them. And then exhale, comes back up. Good. Send the breath out to the sides. And are you breathing more into the belly, or can you send it to the ribs? So maybe you take your hands and put your hands on the outside of that rib and think of sending the breath, this 360-degree breath all the way around your rib cage. We want to feel the back of the rib expanding. We want to feel the ribs lengthen and spread and open up, versus just that belly breathing, the belly going on more. So keep checking in, notice what you're feeling. And if you're like, I'm still having a really hard time figuring this out, it comes back to what I mentioned, the alignment. Our alignment is key. So let's take a pillow and just put a pillow underneath your head and shoulders. And now try it. Now the breaths don't have to be really big. They're normal, gentle breaths. Did the pillow change anything? And then check in with your feet. Like, what's happening with those feet? What's going on down there? Are they gripping? Are they tightening? Now we're going to take your hand and just place your hand like right above your belly button. Take a belly breath in. I want you to breathe into that belly, push it out, and then see what happens with your pelvic floor muscles here. And then exhale, let it go. Take one more belly breath. Observe what you feel in your abdomen, your pelvic floor muscles, maybe even the feet. Exhale, let it go. Now, I want you to take your hands back up to that rib cage and imagine breathing out to the sides of your rib cage. Now, when you take the breath out to the side, what do you feel in the pelvic floor muscles? Did it change? So typically with that big belly breath, what we'll feel is this pressure bearing down on the pelvic floor muscles. So it's increasing too much intra-abdominal pressure. And then typically what you'll hear is when you try to do the rib cage breathing, it feels super awkward and weird and uncoordinated sometimes. Maybe not. Maybe you're like, I got this. But with the rib cage breathing, you're not going to feel that bearing, that pushing down. So this keep coming back to this breath throughout your daily routine with things, whether you're cooking dinner, getting in and out of the car, bending over for the dishwasher. It makes a really big difference. This breath is how everything is going to get started. So you can keep coming back and practicing this. It does matter too that one thing you just kind of check in quickly is like what's going on with your pelvis. Is it really arched forward? Is it really tucked underneath? Like what's happening with the pelvis and changes there? How does that affect how you're able to breathe out into the rib cage? So that's kind of a brief overview of breathing out into your rib cage to really set the whole core system. This is one of the foundations to getting everything going. The next exercise, we've got 2 more to do. Since we're laying down, you can take the pillow and switch it. We're going to do my all-time favorite pelvic floor stretch. Well, a lot of people, if you've got, I don't want to get on the trampoline because I'm going to have problems leaking or I'm afraid to sneeze, think they have to do more Kegels and more strengthening. But it comes back to that pressure management system and how you're managing the pressure under load. And if you're just doing more Kegels, like kind of think of my bicep, I'm just tightening, those already tight pelvic floor muscles are going to then be tighter. So this exercise, I love laying down on your back. And if you take a pillow, you could use a yoga block, a foam roller, and just place it underneath your pelvis. And then gently bring those knees in toward your chest. And you're going to gently pull out to the sides and up toward your chest. Nice, gentle breath in. And you might notice that the inner thighs on one side are a little bit tighter than the other. And that breath, we're still sending it out to the sides of the rib cage. And then check in with your feet. Can you relax the feet? Are they trying to grip or hold tight? Nice, gentle breath in and exhale it go. I love doing this exercise, especially if you notice some of your symptoms get worse after an exercise or the end of the day. This is great to do before or after your exercise routine. A great way to start your day, end your day. Our core and our pelvic floor muscles have been working for us all day long. So just lifting and getting them up gives it a little bit of break from gravity and then connecting with your breath in this position. And it should feel very comfortable, nice and relaxed. Gentle breath in and then gentle breath out. So you can practice the breathing here as well as opening up and kind of relaxing some tight pelvic floor muscles. Okay, and then let's go over one more for the feet. So I had mentioned, I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do this. If you're one that is kind of stuffs your feet, I used to do this. Now I put on a tight shoe and I'm like, oh my gosh, my feet can't breathe. But if you notice that your toes are kind of smushed together or you can't spread those toes apart, working on the mobility in the foot can be very helpful. I love toe spacers. If you don't have toe spacers, you could take a sock and just kind of weave the sock in between your feet and stay for I start people off with like a half hour, an hour if you're just sitting at the end of the day or you're sitting at your desk and kind of weave that in and out. I finally got my boyfriend into being a true believer of toe spacers. He loves to lift and I was like, try it, just try it. Loves to lift and like jam his feet in super narrow shoes. And he's like, oh my gosh, my glutes feel stronger after a week of wearing these. I was like, I told you. So getting like toe spacers or opening up those toes works on the mobility. And then if you don't have them, you can use the sock, but also working on the top of your foot. So taking your thumb, or you could take a ball and roll down along the top in between your toes. And it's surprising how tender the top of your foot can be. While you're working on that, you could even just kind of pull your big toe up. How much does that big toe move? When you lift the big toe up, does the foot want to go out to the outside? So mobility, and then just starting to strengthen the bottom of your foot without curling of those toes is really important. Oh, goodness. And then maybe you take the toes and you kind of stretch out the bottom of your foot if the toes are curled. Maybe notice what pulls along this front line. If you're sitting at your desk, you can keep stretching. You can maybe switch to the other side. I'm just going to show you another one. Maybe if you're sitting at your desk, kind of stretching the bottom of your foot in this direction and noticing the pull from one side to the other. And then if sitting too at your desk or even standing, just working on getting that bend in the ankle. So sitting in your chair, pulling the feet underneath you, that'll help with your squats, with your lunges, and how you're loading the foot a little differently. So it's that fine balance between strength and mobility, but everything comes back to this breathing and getting the breathing and that rib cage to expand, so we're not putting too much pressure on our pelvic floor, whether that leads in pelvic floor issues, hip, back pain, foot pain. Everything is all connected. Oh, I want to thank you all so much for joining me. I wish I could keep talking about it. There's so many more things. It comes up into the hip and what's happening at the hip, but this just hopefully gives you a little insight that the foot is so closely related to those pelvic floor muscles. And I am happy to answer any questions that you guys have. I had a couple people submitted to ask. So if you guys have questions, you can send them in through the chat, and I'll start with these. So someone asked, is a tight pelvic floor the same thing as a strong pelvic floor? They are completely different. A strong pelvic floor, what sometimes maybe people think is we're doing Kegels, lots and lots of Kegels. A strong core is something that can work in this system together like we talked about today. The breathing, the diaphragm going down, that adaptation, and then coming back up, moving and not gripping and holding things. And a tight pelvic floor could be a result of too much abdominal pressure and having to figure out how to manage that pressure system. Okay. Okay, let me go back up You mentioned the foot muscles go up to the hip. My hip hurts when I walk and place the foot on the floor. Is there an exercise to do to help with this? So my hip hurts when I walk and place the foot on the floor. There's so many different exercises that you can do for that. The rolling one that we did can be really helpful to get the tissues in the foot. Another one that I like for the hip, just to see if the hip is tighter, it kind of ties in for some breathing, and it can also help kind of get into this like extended pathway. As if you have a ball, you could take a rolled up towel roll, and you'll just place that find the bone in the front of your pelvis and place that just to the inside. Now, if it's too uncomfortable laying on the ground, you can always do the same thing laying on your back, but coming down, and you'll kind of wiggle to the left, to the right, until you're like, oh goodness, I found that spot. And I'm up so you can hear me, but just kind of let your head rest down. And breathing into that. So you'll take a breath in, push your stomach into the ball, exhale, let it sink in. And see if that area is more tender one side compared to the other side. The other thing that got lots of deep hip rotators, those are another thing to take a look at. So I'd start with that one, but there's so many awesome ones. But the rolling the bottom of the foot should help too. Foot cramps at night. Oh, I hear this one a lot. Okay. So a couple things. Position you're sleeping in. And is it putting more stress on like a certain nerve? So is it Are you a slide sleeper, stomach sleeper? And making sure you're setting yourself up optimally. So say you're a side sleeper, putting a pillow both between your knees and your ankles can be really helpful. If you sleep on your side, I have pillows everywhere. If you've got one underneath your arm, and that just decreases the load and the stress that you're feeling on your SI. I sleep on my stomach, so I don't try to change the way people are sleeping, but maybe you put a pillow underneath your hips. So that's one. Other one, hydration. This is usually what I see is the culprit is people are dehydrated. So drinking, it seems like a lot, half your body weight in ounces per day is what you should be. And especially if you've got pelvic floor, if you're constantly running to the bathroom, you're like, I don't want to drink more water. I'm gonna have to go to the bathroom more. But not being dehydrated could also irritate your bladder as well. So hydration is key. So that's the number one thing I would check in with is hydration, and then checking out the electrolyte. So the potassium, if it's getting hotter out, so bananas are great for that. Spinach is great for that. Those are kind of my usual like go-tos at first. All right, next one. How do you know if your pelvic floor is too tight or weak? Great question. I would say the majority of the time I see that they're too tight of muscles. How do you know? Symptoms of a pelvic floor being too tight are going to be tailbone pain. I showed you on the model, it connects right in there. Deep hip pain that just doesn't want to seem like it goes away. You do all the stretches and everything and it's just not getting better. Low back pain. If you have leaking when you sneeze, laugh, run, jump, or cough, if you're constantly having to like run to the bathroom and you just went, or you get there and you have trouble going to the bathroom, or you go and you feel like you have to go again. Constipation is another big one that can be related to that tight pelvic floor muscle. And if you've been told to do Kegels and you start doing Kegels and they make your symptoms worse, as it's too tight of a pelvic floor. And then knowing if it is too weak, you'll kind of get like a loose or like this heaviness feeling, like using a tampon, like that will have trouble staying in. But those, usually it's this tight pelvic floor, even with people who have prolapse. Now, you do different stretches if you have a prolapse, but that could also be caused from this pressure imbalance. I see a lot of women who have had surgeries and they're like, a year later, I'm back to having the same problems I was before surgery, but it's because you didn't learn how to manage this pressure system. All right. I'm not feeling it too much yet with the breathing. Is it because of the weakness in my pelvic floor and prolapse? It could be a couple different things with that. Did it change if you adjusted the pressure, like putting your head up a little bit, that should change. Do I have a pen? Should have grabbed a pen. I do. Using like a pen to kind of guide. If you put it on your rib cage and thinking of like sending, when I breathe in, you're going to expect the pen to move with your rib cage without like overusing down here. I didn't show this one. With the band, laying down, putting the band around your rib cage and then breathing out with that can be really helpful. And then the other thing that we didn't really go over a lot today is changing the position of your pelvis. So if you tend to be someone whose pelvis is kind of tucked underneath, or if you've got too much of a tilt the other direction, that can play in with it. But it's just start like the practicing and it definitely gets easier. But it's figuring out what do I have to adjust so I can feel it in my rib cage better, so that I'm not doing that belly breathing. But it does get easier. There's lots of little adjustments to do with that. Is constipation related to pelvic floor issues? Yes. Have plantar fasciitis and constipation, and neither were an issue before having kids. 2 babies in 2 years has messed me all up. I hear this all the time. Yes. So yes, constipation is definitely related to tight pelvic floor. So coming like ones I like to go to is breathing. Breathing can be super helpful. And then that pelvic floor stretch that we did at the end here, those are my go-to. Breathe and try that. I'll send it out tomorrow when this email goes out for this, but I have a constipation and yoga video up, so I'll send that out in the link as well. But yes, it's managing this pressure system, and that can help. The other thing with constipation, if you've like done all the food things too, hydration, it always comes back to drinking more water. I struggle with this during the day, not drinking enough. All right. I know, Sarah, I've got to like drink my water. I'm watching you drink. I'm like, oh no. All right, so let's see. Any other questions? All right, so interesting. I've been trying to work out with weightlifting, but 3 days in, and my plantar fascia is so messed up until the soreness goes away. Yeah, that's a pressure management. When you're lifting, and it's so much more advanced than the stuff we did today. The squat gets into it a little bit, but a lot of what I see with people who are trying to lift, are you tucking your tailbone? Are you gripping your upper abs? Are you holding your breath through the whole way through the range of motion? And once you learn what you're doing and changing those things, you won't have that big flare up, the soreness of the abs, but it's managing the pressure. If people tell you like, oh no, don't do that anymore, like there's ways that you can do what you want to do. It just takes practice and consistency getting these things down. All right, I think that is all the questions. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I will send an email out tomorrow morning with the recap of this. I'll put a few other resources in there for you. And let me know if you found this helpful. If you want more information like this, let me know in the chats. I can work on putting together another program for everyone. But I just kept seeing it with all my clients and kept getting questions about it. So it's a little glimmer into kind of how everything's connected. You're welcome. All right. Fabulous, everyone. Well, I hope you all, let's see. Do you have other videos? Yes, I do. So I'll also put this in the email too for everyone who is on the call. I have the pelvic floor playbook. So it's going to be for the next week, 20% off. So I'll put a code in for that. And that goes much more into depth, like the foot, it covers the hip, it goes over the rib cage, because I'm so guilty of this too all the time behind my computer. So it will go over the connection with, all of those different body parts and how you kind of build it up step by step. So that's a program that I have for that. I'll also put in a couple other videos that I have for pelvic floor stretching on YouTube. But if you're looking for something that is step-by-step guide of what to do versus trying to piecemeal it together on YouTube, the pelvic floor playbook is out there. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And please feel free, reach out any questions. And if you don't see it pop up in sometimes it goes to like spam or promotional, please let me know and I'll send you the link for the recording. All right, everybody. So great having you all. You are welcome. Take care, everybody.